working on that '07 Subaru. She's from the Outback, you know. If you haven't seen, check out the first couple videos. This engine from this car, it has some problems. It's got a knock noise, so we pulled it out. Mongo picked up this engine from the junkyard just yesterday. Mongo got to see this one running. It idled around at the yard for a good couple hours. And then Mongo pulled it out. So Mongo know that one good, as is. Today we're gonna get this new junkyard engine ready to go into that car. So we got some gaskets to swap around. We gotta check the timing belt on this one. Obviously it's gonna need some parts swapped over because that one's missing some parts and this one's got some new parts. This engine, she's a little bit dirty, so you know Mongo don't like dirty engines. A clean engine is a happy engine. That and it's kind of hard to tell if you got a leak somewhere, if you got all this old debris and oil and junk on there. If you take care of your engine takes care of you. If you take care of your things take care of you. If you take care of your family takes care of you. Pretty basic. This engine is the one from the junkyard, and it doesn't have any of the timing cover stuff because this was in a 2006 Subaru Outback, and 2006 and 7 Outback engines are the same. It has a little thing right here in the top that shows EJ25. EJ25, made in Japan. And they all have the V25 heads for the 2.5 liter. But this one was in a front end accident. And it was in such a bad accident that this gear for the passenger side camshaft was actually broken. This is that gear. So you can see the bolt is supposed to be in the center, and it broke right off in the accident. So to get this to run, Mongo had to get a new gear from a different, just junk engine, but the gear was good. And then retime the engine, put everything back together. She fired and ran for a couple hours. Just so you get an idea on what happened to this engine. So we're going to have to swap over all of the timing cover materials. You don't actually need a timing cover for these engines to work, but the timing cover protects your fingers and all the other parts from accidentally getting into the belt. So it's not a good idea to run these engines without the cover, just because if anything gets in here, it'll get chewed up pretty quick. Now this belt seems pretty loose and worn to Mongo. So we're going to take the other one apart and see how it looks. We might swap the timing belt as well. Most all crankshaft bolts and harmonic balancers, it's easiest with a pink ugga-dugga. Otherwise, when you try to loosen that by hand, it'll just rotate the crankshaft and turn the engine. That is a 22 millimeter. These harmonic balancers, they're not a press fit. They do have a keyway. Just a little wiggle and that'll come right off. You have to get that off to swap this timing chain cover because obviously that pulley's in the way. Start going around and get all of your timing chain cover bolts off. They're 10 millimeter. Love when they're missing bolts. And of course this bolt's missing because the piece in the back is broken. Not all of them are the same. Some have a gap. So just be aware of where they all come from. That's very nice. For sure that timing belt going on there. Before we take any of that apart, Mongo wants to check the timing of this engine. Throw the crankshaft bolt back in. Just spin it in by hand. It's super easy. You're looking at this pulley. There's an arrow. You're looking at this pulley. There should be a little dot on it right down there. And we're looking at this pulley. There's another arrow. What you want to do is have all of those points straight up. So we'll use that 22 millimeter again. Now if we look, that little dot is going to line up with this little dot straight up and down. It's going to line, they're going to point at each other. This arrow is going to point at this little notch in this plastic right there. And then this arrow is going to line up with this seam. Because you have your valve cover here. Then you have kind of like your camshaft hold down plate. Then the cylinder head. So there's a seam right there. All three of these should align at the exact same time. Not yet. There we go. Crankshaft spins at twice the speed of your camshafts. That's your 4 strokes. Suck, squeeze, bang, blow. So this crankshaft rotates 2 times for these to only rotate 1 time. So that's aligned right, that's aligned right, and that's aligned right. And if we look at this belt, there's not that much deflection in this. She's pretty taut. That's pretty taut. That's pretty taut. That's probably the loosest one, but it's still pretty tight. That's a nice new belt. If we look at this old belt, much looser. This looks like a lot of slop right there. This is normal for a belt that is not brand new. Not to say that this is a junk belt. It's fine. She'd run for a real long time still. But you can see it's got a bit more play. And because Mongo's putting this back into a car, might as well put the brand new belt on it. To get this timing belt off, the first thing we got to do is go to this timing belt tensioner, which, if you'll notice, has a little hole there. A little hole on the post sticking up. And then on the other side is another hole. So we got to start by lining up all those holes. You can use an Allen head wrench. Find one that fits through the holes. That one looks pretty good. Then we'll take a little pry bar. Rest it down here on the water pump. And push it up. This one is a 1/16. Sometimes you need just a little extra tension on that pry bar. And you can slowly sneak this belt off. There we go. And then that flops all the way out the way. That Allen head, though, holds that little piston in there. We'll do that same thing on this one. Take our Allen head, slide it in the first. Set our pry bar down on the water pump. Pry it up. And make sure it goes all the way through. And then this timing belt will kind of wiggle right off. Of course, this one being the new one is much tighter. Just loosen the 14mm bolt and take the tensioner right out. Leave the Allen head in there, and you can see it goes all the way through. And in this direction, you can see there's a decent amount of pressure on that Allen head wrench. Now we got to time this engine. It's always best to have the crankshaft with that dot lined up vertically up and down with this little notch. The camshaft on the driver's side, the arrow vertically up and down lined up with this little notch. You'll notice it's a little bit to the left. Now, because the camshaft gear is attached to the rockers and whatnot on the inside, there's valve springs, there's tension on it. These don't like to move and stay real easy. This one naturally wants to rest right there. When we put the belt on, we'll have to adjust this one tooth. This camshaft gear, the arrow is way to the inside, and that's kind of where it wants to rest based on the cycle it's currently on in the engine. So Mongo's going to start on this gear and going to make sure the belt is all the way that way against the outer surface. And then wrap it around the water pump, making sure it's pretty flush with the front. Then this idler over that idler. Idler's making them pretty flush with the front. Now I'm going to keep tension on this belt with the left hand. Then we're going to get over to this cam gear. Now this cam gear we have to adjust. So we'll take a 17 millimeter and move it around. That looks pretty up and down, but we want to be one tooth off in the same direction as the other cam. Turn the cam, not the belt. And you can see she's off. And so now that we're in this position, it looks like it's just off to the right, one tooth. We'll spin this cam, which spins the other one. Straight up and down, aligned with that seam. And how's this one look? Pretty straight up and down, aligned with that notch. The crankshaft is already in its position. So now what we need to do, by keeping tension on all of this at the same time, you don't have to go crazy tight on this. Now you can see that the belt's not aligned quite right, so just put a little pressure on there and adjust that belt. Everything else seems aligned real good. Just make sure when you're done, go ahead and rotate this a little bit back and forth. Make sure all the teeth are on and reline up the crank. That dot should line up with that notch. Double check, make sure each cam, the arrow lines right up with the notch and the arrow lines right up with that seam. The most common problem Mongo sees with Subaru engines is they're one tooth off. Because when they're installing this, it'll slip one tooth. You know, either one of these cams that they just aren't aligned in the grooves right, and then when you go to put this on, there's that little bit of a shift. And they're one tooth off. It might take a couple times before you get her, but make sure when you're done, everything lines up perfectly. And now that we're all done, get our Allen out. The reason Mongo likes using an Allen is because then you have something to grab a hold of to pull it out. You can use a nail, a drill bit, but you just won't have, you know, this little piece to grab hold of to slide it out. A little 5/8 spark plug socket. And those are covered in oil and really worn, so this engine needs some spark plugs. So we might as well get all those out of there. You can see the difference in those plug gaps. Very interesting and odd, considering this engine ran great in the car. While I get the valve covers off to get to those gaskets, we can just remove this tube if you'd like. You could leave it on. This one is actually cracked, which is why Mongo wants to get rid of it anyway. Then it's just a bunch of 10 millimeter bolts. Uh-oh, that's not good. Gonna get this thing out the way. That's a 12 millimeter. These are just those goofy bolt extractors. Nope, just turning her into Swiss cheese. There it goes. Luckily, the engine that came out has brand new valve cover gaskets, spark tube gaskets, and Mongo gonna use a new bolt from it too. Of course, this is the engine that just came out, and they didn't even put new spark plugs in it. Why would you do head gaskets and not replace the plugs? Well, that got Mongo wondering if the thermostat was replaced on the engine that had the head gaskets done. So we get a 10 millimeter. Check it out. Because if it's not been replaced, Mongo's gonna pick up a thermostat too. Doesn't look very new. Yep, doesn't look like the surface of that was cleaned up either. Before you swap anything over, it's always a good idea just to go through and clean the surface up real good. So that way you don't get any dust or debris, and you get a nice tight seal. Mongo give her a little shot of air just to clear out any debris inside there. These spark plug seals they pop right off like that. Just to give you an idea, here's a brand new one. And you'll notice they're quite a bit taller, thicker, because these ones are really old and just have been smushed down over the years. So oil leaking into the spark plug tube is a pretty common thing on high mileage Subaru engines. This is the brand new reusable valve cover gasket from the other engine. This hose doesn't have that crack, so we're going to transfer the whole thing on here. Mongo run these through the wire brush real quick on the wire wheel. Just clean them up real nice. Then Mongo takes some of his Buddy Mr. Anti-Sleaze and put a little coating on the big part here, so that way it slides through and it doesn't corrode and rust like you've seen the old ones did. These get torqued to 7.5 Newton meters. Finish up with a couple of brand new NGK Iridium spark plugs. NGK pretty proud of these, and so is AutoZone. $10 plus per spark plug. They do have a crush washer on them, so you got to give them a little bit of oomph, but not too much. You don't want to over torque your spark plugs. And that feel pretty good to Mongo. Now we just got to do the exact same thing to the other side. Now we can get this timing cover back on here. A whole bunch of those 10mm bolts, and it's missing 2. So Mongo's got to get them from the yard tomorrow. These do not have to be very tight at all. There's probably a torque spec somewhere. Basically just run them in, give them a little oomph, and call it good. It's just holding on to a little plastic cover. To get this side, there is a little alignment groove right here. Goes right inside that groove. And that's the other one Mongo's got to get tomorrow from the yard. And we'll have to take our crankshaft bolts out. Mongo likes to throw just a little bit of anti-sleaze on this surface, so that way the pulley slides on and off real easy, always. Mongo always keeps the harmonic balancer with the crankshaft. So this being the crankshaft and balancer that came off this engine, it stays on this engine. The one that came out of the other engine will stay with that engine. That slid much better. Just give her a good oomph. There is a torque spec for it. Mongo put it probably right there. Last thing for this prep, Mongo's just gonna throw the thermostat in there. Make sure the surface is good and clean. It is kind of a oblong shape, so the thermostat itself is kind of centered lower. There's a little cutout in here, so the thermostat kind of goes towards the bottom. Run our bolts in and get these torqued up. Well, Mongo thinks that engine is now ready to get set in the car. Still got to put the intake gaskets on it, exhaust gaskets, hoses, button up a couple other things, but gonna do that once it's in the car. Well, hopefully this video helped you if you had to get a Subaru engine prepped, or we're doing valve cover gaskets, spark plugs, thermostat, timing. It's a good video for seeing how to time a Subaru engine, at least with the single overhead cam. Well, if you like this video, be sure to like this video. Yeah, if you like this video and other videos from Mongo Fix, be sure to subscribe. Mongo always working on all sorts of stuff. Mongo, thank you.